Testing
So
1, 2.
I think we should get started. People are going to continue to come in, but we've got 2 hours tonight. I appreciate everybody coming in. I originally posted for this event in the Next Architects Facebook group. A few people I contacted myself, and a few people contacted me. So it's a really good mix of people who I currently know and people that have just come out on their own and want to share a part of their experience. And so I just want to say, for anyone to talk about this, especially to an audience who doesn't see things the way you do, is extremely brave. And I appreciate that from each of you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
this means a lot to me. And with that, I'm going to introduce myself. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Adam Denias. I'm an architect at JHP Architecture in Dallas, Texas. And I founded a Facebook group called Next Architects. So I've been in the profession about 4 years, and I'm really passionate about professional development. And I believe everybody can build the careers they want. So I don't feel like I ever have all the answers, but I feel like if we can get a group of people together, together with our shared experiences, we can really lift each other up. So you can see why an event like this would fit in perfectly with what I'm trying to do out there. So for anyone not a part of it, I really encourage you to join. I try to build a really encouraging atmosphere, very positive, very uplifting, and anyone who's not is immediately kicked out. So we talk about career situations that arise, talk about promotions and even salary and raises, and even dealing with toxic workplaces and how to navigate that. So that's my spiel. Tonight I have a co-host. His name is Randy Wilburn, and I'm going to let him introduce himself, give you the whole spiel.
Well, I don't know. I don't have a whole spiel, but my name is Randy Wilburn, and I'm excited to be here with you guys tonight. I've actually worked, I don't look like it, but I've worked in this industry for more than 23 years now, two plus decades. And I come at it from a different perspective because I've worked with design firm professionals all over the country on a wide variety of needs from a consulting standpoint. And I think when I got into this space back in '97, one of the things that struck me was that I was like, where are all the brown and black people? That was the one thing that I didn't see. And when I say I was everywhere, I mean, I was everywhere. You name it, all the big firms and all the small firms in between. And I think that, we have finally hit a day of reckoning that requires us to say, you know what, we got to do something differently. We have to do something in a much more profound way. And I think with all the important work that you guys do as design professionals, and this is something that I've always shared in any training that I've done or any talking that I've done to any firms and any firm leaders and any individuals that work within design firms, is that you guys do great things. And sometimes you have to be reminded of that. But I think even in this watershed moment that we're in, there are still some great things to be done with regard to how design firms are operated, how individuals are given opportunities to grow within their craft. And I'm just excited to be here to hear really from you guys and to kind of be a sounding board for some of the challenges that you still face, even in 2020. And I think I have to, sometimes I think, man, we've come so far, but yet I keep being reminded, and George Floyd and everything else that we're experiencing right now in this moment in time is a sober reminder that we still have so much further to go. So I'm really excited to be with all of you tonight. And certainly there's no place I'd rather be but here participating on this call with all of you. Thank you.
Yeah, beautifully said, Randy. Wholeheartedly agree with all that. It's really not being talked about enough how we're being impacted in our profession and how Black professionals are being impacted, especially. So I know I've had conversations here and there with friends, but there's really so much more that I can learn. There's so much more that everyone at Next Architects can learn. And it's really come from the experiences that we have as a collective. So I hope that you guys can feel comfortable talking about what it is you want to talk about. I'm going to try to lead the conversation. but I'm going to really leave it more open to what it is that you want to share. So tonight's really about our featured guests. And so we want to give them the space to share their voice as Black architects and designers in our profession. So that being said, we're going to take the time to give each of you opportunity to lead the discussion. Maybe you want to share your experiences in the profession. Maybe you want to talk about how systemic racism has impacted you or others in the profession. Maybe you want to talk about obstacles that have held you back or hold back others. And then finally, maybe we can talk about how we can take action, support each other, and become better allies. So it's really open to you guys, okay? If there's something you're not comfortable talking about, that's absolutely fine. We can be talking about some sensitive things, but I appreciate you guys all being here tonight. So my first time running a panel like this, and so my number one priority for tonight is to allow everybody a chance to speak. So we're going to allocate 20 minutes per person to share what it is they want to. At the end of the night, we'll either open it up to the panelists to decide whether they want to continue some of the conversations that we started, or if we want to do a Q&A. Okay? So everybody who's attending tonight, feel free to write in questions. We may or may not get to them, but irregardless, it's going to start conversations, and we can use that to propel future conversations, okay?
Yeah, and I'll be looking at the chat and looking at these questions, so I'll point some things out as well. So but I won't interrupt anybody that's talking. So, hey, let me just say one more thing, Adam.
Go for it.
I guess I don't know. It's funny because all of a sudden, I think one of the challenges that we all face, especially for the African Americans in the room, is that we're all spokespeople for our people. Right? Everybody's coming to you now for advice and ideas and what should I read and what video should I watch and what should I do and am I okay? Do you think I'm a bigot? Do you think I'm a racist? So these are all of the things that we're all dealing with. But lately I've been hearing from a lot of firms that have come to me and said, listen, we want to make a change. And so there is no better time than now to really push that envelope of change. And so I think what everybody has to share tonight is going to be really important. And my hope would be that this event goes well beyond just this time frame that we've set, because I think it could make a difference and it could really inform how a lot of design firm leaders make plans for the future and how they deal with diversity and inclusion. So just no pressure. So, but yeah, so I just thought I would put that out there. So
yeah, absolutely. That's why I have you here, Randy.
It's all good.
Okay. So I'm going to ask each person the same question to kind of get them started. And so some of you might want to talk for 20 minutes. Some of you might want to talk a little less. Some of you might want to talk for 5 minutes and then open it up for discussion. Whatever the case is, the discussion is going to last 20 minutes. I'm going to politely say it's time to move on, but at the end, we can always come back. Okay? All right. So would anyone like to go first? Actually, before that, I just remembered, let's introduce our 4 featured guests for tonight. Let's just do this real quick and just let us know your name, what school you went to, and how far along you are in the profession. So let's just start with that. So who wants to go first?
I'll go first. Adam.
Go for it, Randall.
My name is Arzavia. Everybody call me Randall or Randall, whichever one suits best. But I go to the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, same place Adam graduated from. I'm going back for my master's this coming fall, and I should be finished December 2021, hopefully. I have no experience in the profession yet. So all of my experiences more so campus-based.
For sure. That's experience in itself.
Okay, I'll go next. Hi, everyone. My name is Faye Quadri. I graduated from Carnegie Mellon University in 2016. I have been working for about 4 years, be 4 years in July, mostly in commercial, a little bit of multifamily and office interiors.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I can go next. So I'm Jessica Gardenhire. I graduated from Cornell University in 2014. I am from Cleveland, Ohio, and I'm in Cleveland right now for quarantine, but I currently live in the Bay Area. So I have 6 years of experience in San Francisco, and I did mostly commercial work. And so I'd say that the first company I worked for did big box architecture. So we did a lot of master planning, campus planning for people like Google, Facebook, Amazon, and but on the developer side. And then we also did tenant improvements and research and development labs as well. And I have recently switched into doing high-rise multi-residential, and I've been working in that for very little time. I'm learning that right now.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, this time I've unmuted myself. So hi, my name is Ramatullah Salam Mohammed. People call me Rama. I attended Hampton University, graduated in 2015, and have worked in Africa and recently moved back to the States, working in infrastructure transportation projects. And back when I was working in Africa, I was working on a lot of institutional projects, hospitals, education, that kind of stuff. So yeah, excited to be back.
Awesome.
Welcome.
Yeah, appreciate it. Cool. So we're going to open up the floor to one of you for 20 minutes to lead the discussion. And I'm just gonna pick somebody. So Jessica, would you like to start?
Yes, I can absolutely start. So a few of the thoughts that came to my mind as far as sharing my experience was thinking about what my life was growing up in the suburb that I did and having the expectations I had as far as what it was going to be like to be an architect, the people who were architects and the examples that I saw in my life, and the diversity of college and contrasting that with the working world. So I'd say that, so my father's an electrician. I'm from a suburb called Strongsville in Cleveland, Ohio. And I will admit that it is a predominantly white suburb. I had a class of, I want to say 800 kids. We broke a record when I went with my freshman class, and I was one of 6 Black. So, oh, I'm sorry. My headphone is changing. Okay. So I grew up very much so able to master being in predominantly white spaces, which I think worked to my advantage. I think between whether it was my experience in church, my parents are ministers of an interracial and an international church. So between that, as well as, I was raised in very good situations to be able to navigate the dynamics of the world in that way. But as comical as it will sound, Cornell University was the most diverse space I'd ever been in my life. I know that you probably would not expect that at all, but I remember I got accepted into a program that I didn't realize was a minority focused program, and I walked in and didn't even know how to interact with that many people of color that weren't my relatives. and I'm glad I had that experience. I think that it was very healthy as far as me learning to love and accept myself as a Black woman, because I can't say I got that growing up in such a Caucasian suburb. And I can contrast it with my sister's college experience. She went to Miami of Ohio, which is same demographic as my high school, like almost a clone. So I can attest to the fact that going to a diverse school, even if it is an Ivy League school, and then definitely not as diverse as an HBCU, it meant a lot for me, and it helped me gain quite a lot of confidence. But even within that institution, there was a lot of imposter syndrome, and there was a lot of problematic behavior that I saw behind the scenes, and I had the right people in my corner and the right people to advocate for me, but I saw classmates, especially even in the architecture program, that between the lack of representation and also just very bizarre policing and grading policies just did not, it was very evident that preferential treatment was not given to a lot of the African American men in my class. It was blatantly obvious to me, at least, and it just shocked me that that the pattern could continue the way it did for so long. And then to contrast that with the working role, it was almost like I had very high expectations of San Francisco, especially being from Cleveland. And in Cleveland, I knew what to expect. In the South, I knew what to expect. My mom's from Tennessee. My dad's side is from, I have a lot of family in Georgia, so I knew what to expect in the South. But I figured going to San Francisco, it was going to be so similar to Cornell as far as it being a very diverse, inclusive environment. And I will admit, I faced a lot of challenges, like things I thought I would not have to deal with unless I moved down south. And it took other friends making me realize how extreme some of the incidents that I had to deal with at work were. And I won't dive into that at the moment, but I guess one of the things that I learned from that experience was that there's no right way to respond in the moment to whether it's minorly or extremely aggressive, whether it's in your face racism or just those subtle things every single day. I learned that I didn't know how to deal with that in the professional world. I didn't know how to speak up about it and call it out. And it was extremely distracting. I'd walk in and I'd feel like heat on my neck. I'd feel like a heaviness on my shoulders and just so much alertness and awareness that my every move was being watched at a certain point in this company. And it wasn't always a place of negativity that watching was coming from, but it was a very constant othering. So I started a company in the Bay Area of 160 people, and I was for most of my time there, I was the only African-American. There was one civil engineer who was an African-American woman, she went to Stanford, like an incredibly smart woman. And she left after a very short time because she was like, something's just not right. And one of my other coworkers was, he was biracial, but he knew that he could pass as white, so he never spoke up or advocated in situations. And that didn't bother me. I understand where he was coming from, but there were a lot of very odd situations where it would have meant a lot at work if someone had at least been like, that was weird. And I was very thankful that towards the end of my time there, that there was incredible sexual harassment training where they actually talked about race. And usually sexual harassment training is a complete joke. and it's these videos from like 1995 that you're like, it causes more problem than good. But the training was actually very good, but my coworkers' responses were still very hurtful and triggering to even to the really good training. They were just like, it was in regards to a Title IX law as far as not being able to discriminate against hair in the workplace and identifying microaggressions, because that law had just passed in California, maybe sometime between when our sexual harassment training it had already passed. So they had to go over it in the training, and the woman did an incredible job giving examples, but there was a lot of whataboutism in the room. And I eventually just had a small breakdown as far as like, I was listening through webinar because I was remote that day. And I just kind of had to tell everyone, I'm like, each and every one of you have done this to me in this company at some point in time. You need to stop trying to find a way around listening to her and actually listen. And HR thanked me later. So I think that was, I think there were a lot of times I did not speak up for myself in my 5 years at the company. But I think that the things I took away from it are that you're never going to know how to respond when someone says something blatantly insane to you in the moment. It's not a point of weakness to not know how to quench it in the moment. I had some psychotic things said to me, from everything from me being damned to hell in front of everybody to being called like the N-word in a public meeting. So or I should say being interrogated about it and needed to keep my composure and just be like, what point is this proving? And I am very thankful that I kept my composure during every situation. And it just proved to me that I think this industry in general, and Cornell proved this to me as well, that I think our industry protects bad apples too much. Maybe I shouldn't say bad apples, but architects are known to be psychotic, and it's almost honored in some ways, especially my experience at Cornell. It's almost like the crazier you are as a tenured professor, the more they're like, oh, that's just how that person is. They've been doing this for years. And it really did create a terrible mental health environment. Just it's architecture is hard enough to try to learn in school how to get a good grade based off of opinion. So it's a double fold when that person's opinion that you're trying to gain approval of is acting bipolar or acting unpredictable. And unfortunately, my time at that school was full of a lot of very old school professors who are like, if I went through this, you have to as well. And I had some amazing, great professors, but most of them were visiting. So most of the tenured professors during my time there were very stuck in their ways. And I realized in the working world, I'm like, I think that was my taste of realizing that even in the working world, there are some nut jobs that are protected. And I would say at the company I worked at, it was amazing people. The principals were incredible. And I would work with them again in a heartbeat. The leadership was so great, but there were just a few people at the medium leadership level that they just kept being like, oh, he has a temper tantrum every now and then, let it go. And people would quit over these temper tantrums. I'm like, how do you keep excusing this behavior? And there were a few people that I noticed would have these temper tantrums towards, there was one person in particular who would be totally fine until he was working with an Asian engineer, and he would just flip out. And when I started noticing that behavior, I started to take it to HR. I started to just tell them, I'm like, he doesn't treat this person like this, but he treats all these people like this. If he knows how to work through a problem with all these people of this background, but he can't with people of this other background, what is the pattern? They're like, oh, he's just like that. I'm like, no, it's this person told me that they felt like they were racially attacked. So I started to try to advocate for others in the company as far as calling out the things that I wish that people had called out and verified for me. I wish that someone had spoken up and said that this was too much as I was being interrogated about very non-professional things in a professional meeting by HR. I wish that because one of my good friends who's in London said that a very similar thing happened to her as far as her being just constantly drilled about stereotypes. She's from New Jersey and of Japanese descent, and she told me that she like one of her PMs just won't stop asking her if she grew up knowing karate, things like that. And she's like, I never have told you that I know karate. So she confirmed, she's like, yeah, sometimes it just takes someone stepping in and saying like, this joke isn't funny. And I will say that I think that I was very proud of myself in the moment as far as the second sexual harassment training, when people weren't taking it seriously and they were touching on things that I felt I faced a lot in the company, that I was happy that I spoke up and said something, but it was draining. And the next day I started applying for jobs. So and mind you, I had spoken to my higher ups about all these problems before. And I talked to them, and I gave them a list of my problems and grievances, and they reassured me that they wanted me to be principal, that they didn't want me to leave, that they really they're like, no, it's just a few bad eggs. I'm like, get rid of them. So I think the industry needs to do a better job, even in college, of discouraging completely unprofessional behavior. And it can start with something as simple as like the typical architect being able to throw a temper tantrum and throw like coffee against the wall in movies. And I mean, I don't know how many architects are in movies, but I think even things like allowing us to strive for having enough sleep and having a work-life balance can go a long way in encouraging us to treat people sanely. And although I know that this is more of an open forum on race, like I would never sit and call any of my old coworkers racist, but I will say it hurt me when I heard them all say, "Oh, I missed a good sexual harassment meeting," referring to when I was drilled about the N-word for 10 minutes in front of the company. And in those moments I told them, I was like, how can you sit here with me at happy hour and say that that was something that you wish you had experienced? And if you had experienced it, would you have spoken up for me? Would you have made it stop? And they apologized. So I'm like, you got to understand, like, multiply that by 160 people. Why did how many other people are saying like, oh, darn, I would love to ridicule this experience. And I don't think people realize how much it can mean just for someone else to step in, because there's so many thoughts going through the minds of the minority. We have to balance so many things in our mind of like, okay, am I going to be irate if I respond? Am I going to be taken the wrong way? Is it just going to be thrown in my face of like, this isn't a big deal? Or even having someone advocate as far as saying like, this person should have the opportunity to be a designer. They should be in the room for this stuff. I noticed very quickly in San Francisco that I'm like, I don't know a single Black designer. I only know technical architects. Why is it that the African Americans are not able to be the quarterback? They're only able to be, I can't finish that metaphor because I don't know the analogy of a quarterback to an architect versus a technical architect, but they can't, it's very rare that they're steering the ship from the design phase, at least from what I saw and my research in the San Francisco Bay Area. I know maybe one designer at a large firm, and two, I can think of two. But it just became evident to me very quickly that I'm like, okay, this area thinks that they are very much so beyond race. And they think that this is not a problem. And they're like, oh, I'm in California. What? There's no racism here. And I was quickly like, okay, it's just like I'm back in Cleveland.
Wow.
Yeah. Jesus.
I appreciate you sharing.
That's a lot.
No, but it's your life, you know.
Yeah.
It's real. Damn.
Yeah.
And the very last thing you said really hit. It's the beyond race. It's people that think they're beyond race, so they can say whatever they want. You bring in something and they just think it's your opinion, and it's not fact, right? It can't be them because they're beyond that. And I feel like I recognize a lot of what you're saying, but there's this additional layer that I just don't see. And so that was really powerful.
And by all means, I don't know how I am on time. I'm open to questions from other panelists, but
we got 3.5 minutes.
Okay, 3.5 minutes.
So yeah.
Yeah.
So I got a question. So it sounds like as great of well, I guess Cornell was a great experience for you, but it sounds like they didn't fully equip you for what you were going to encounter when you got out into the workplace.
No. I don't think any school does.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Well, I mean, I think they leave it to your parents or hopefully somebody that pulls you along. And I think the challenge is because there aren't a lot of people that look like us in the design space, who's going to pull you aside, right? I mean, that's the question that you have to ask is who is going to do it? And some people are afraid to go down that road for fear of, dancing in a minefield or saying something that they shouldn't say. And I think that is the real challenge. But that's why I think real talk has to happen early and often with design firm leaders, with the C-suites of these firms, and they need to create what I would call a safe place for you to have real talk without fear of retribution, any type of microaggressions, or any type of implicit bias rearing its ugly head. Because that I think is the real challenge that all of you guys face early on in your careers, because you still have a long career ahead of you. You could do this for another 35, 40. I mean, listen, I know architects that are 78 years of age and they keep telling me I still have some years left. So there's a lot of time ahead, right? You don't
Yeah.
want to be dealing with this for the next 30 or 40 years.
No.
That's the thing.
And what I did was I got dinner or lunch, I can't recall, with my friends' bosses. I'll keep this brief. I have like 1 minute. I got lunch with my friends' bosses who were both African-American founders of their own firm, but it was a smaller firm than I wanted to be at, but I used them as a resource to talk to about these issues, to find out like what is going on? Is this normal? Should I just leave and go back to Ohio? And I took their advice very seriously, and they were like, they said it would be a shame for the profession to lose me, that I was just too talented to drop away after that experience. And one of them had interviewed at that same firm like 20 years before, and he was like, yeah, just come to any firm downtown. and he was right. I'm at another firm, 0 issues, 0 weird feelings. But I guess like follow your gut is one piece of advice, but it was my first job, and that's like, 2 examples, but it became something where I felt policed. Like I felt very watched. Everything I did, from my hair, my clothes, someone had to make a comment, and some were very sweet and amazing, but others were alarming. Yeah.
And, I also think somebody brought up in the questions, Helen Vasquez said, and to think that San Francisco is sometimes categorized as a bubble from the rest of the U.S. It's still happening here too. Sigh. Yeah, Helen, it's actually happening everywhere. And I was telling somebody the other day, because I'm now in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and I came down from Boston, and I was telling some people down here, I said, listen, there's more racism in Boston than there is here in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and I'm in the heart of the South. So, I think a lot of times people think that, oh, well, if you're on the coast, then you're good, right? Or you're, as long as you're not in these southern states that are somewhat backwards, then you're oblivious to it. But actually, in places like San Francisco, LA, Boston, it can actually be worse. Because it's so underhanded, the type of racism that you encounter, that you don't know whether you're coming or going. You think you're being punked like you're in a movie or something, like this can't be right. But that's sometimes is the reality that I've heard from other people of color that work in the design space in those major cities. So,
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So we just hit the 20. So appreciate it, Jessica. And thanks, Randy.
yeah.
Okay.
She started us off right. That was good, because I think everything
Real talk.
that she said, I'm sure a lot of other people are just nodding their heads like, yep, I've either been there or I'm there now. So that was very good. It was very good.
Yeah. Okay. Next, let's get up Ramatulai.
Thank you, Adam, and thanks for having me on this panel.
Yeah. So what
Jessica
about your
Amy-
experience? I'm sorry.
Mhm.
What about your experience do you want to share with us tonight?
Well, a lot of my experiences are kind of similar to what Jessica went through, but what I would really like to focus on in terms of my experience is my experience attending an HBCU
For sure.
and HBCUs in general, as well as my general professional experience. So as I mentioned, I went to Hampton University. I'm very fortunate to live on the East Coast, where there are so many great historically Black programs, because you kind of don't realize that so many of them are fixated here on the East Coast. Maybe everybody else doesn't get an opportunity to attend because of that distance. But one thing about HBCUs is I feel like people don't really understand how little others know about HBCUs. Like, we had a conversation within my architecture department here in Virginia, and one of the questions was, why do people attend HBCUs? Why are they intentionally separating themselves? Doesn't that go against sort of what we're trying to do in terms of inclusion and diversity? And you're like, you don't know. You don't know why they're there in the first place. So I feel like, but that's from somebody who's been in the industry for a very long time, and I feel like people just don't know what they don't know when it comes to Black people and race in HBCUs in general. And there are a lot of architecture programs all over the country, but people, Black people attend, 30% of Black architects attend an HBCU, and HBCUs award 52% of pre-professional degrees in architecture.
Wow.
And that's astounding out of only 7 programs in the entire United States. That's just a really crazy number to think about. So as Jessica was mentioning in terms of her minority focused program, being able to have that community around you supporting you and sort of being seen as more than just your race. You're seen as sort of what you're bringing to the table, what your actual skills are, what your ideas are, and your race not necessarily being the deciding factor, because it's mostly Black people, maybe about 80% Black people. And I think that's another sort of misconception people have about HBCUs. They think, you know, it's all Black, complete separation and exclusion, but it's actually a very large ethnic mix. A lot of people don't know, actually, in terms of Hampton University, it was very famous for its program with Native American students, and has a lot of variety with international students even today. So there's a lot of diversity that people don't know about and don't see in terms of HBCU programs. And another thing I want to bring up in terms of HBCUs is that because a lot of people don't see how important they are, they don't receive as much support, since people are assuming, you know, the majority are coming from PWIs, primarily white institutions. They don't think that they need as much help, but it's very critical. That's where so many of our architectural talent are coming from. So one thing I wanted to give on this call is just a couple of pointers for people in terms of how they can support HBCU architecture students. Number one, you can donate to their architecture programs directly. Most schools have ways you can directly donate to that specific program. You can donate supplies. I don't know if anybody else had those same issues where you're trying to find a piece of cardboard that's not busted out. I got into a couple of issues with footprints on my projects. So yes, that was a problem for me and very problematic in its consistency. Donating study materials. A lot of people don't realize how much work goes into studying for these architecture registration exams. And being able to start that process in school can be a huge benefit to people, because passing these exams takes such a long time, years and years for some. And I feel like that's kind of glossed over. And, you know, attending crits and volunteering to visit the students while they're there is very critical. And, you know, just being able to pop in, just contacting the studio leads and finding out, hey, can I come in and talk and find out what your students are working on? And you might even find some amazing talent that you want to bring back to your company and just get those ideas for yourself, you know. And last but not least is supporting the AIAS and NOMAS chapters. Like maybe you want to donate to those chapters specifically, or maybe sponsor a trip to conferences and stuff like that. That'd be a huge boon, being able to get, you know, more visibility, more networking with other architects and people within the industry. So those are just some things. I wanted to leave everybody with just some things you can do to sort of help students at HBCUs. One of the things that I feel like they need to touch on more in architecture school in general is the registration experience overall, and how that, you know, affects Black students. Most Black students don't have a lot of exposure in terms of architects and the architecture industry, construction industry. But one thing I didn't know when I was starting my process, my formal process after I graduated, is in the state of Virginia, you actually have to have 3 separate people championing you in terms of your ethics and morals, and they become sort of like your sponsors in a way. And they have to be registered architects that you've known for over a year. And imagine you don't know any architects that can speak up for you, vouch for you. And if your school doesn't have a mentoring program, a networking program in place, that can be a huge obstacle for someone. And that's just to get your foot in the door of the registration process. And yeah, that's something I wish was highlighted more. And the ARE process, I feel like, was not touched on as much as it should have been. And the financial burden of these exams, I feel like wasn't stressed enough. Like 230 plus per exam for each retake, nobody gives you that information. And Black architecture students have some of the highest rates of debt compared to all other architecture students. I know right now in the United States, we have a huge problem in terms of college education and financing, and everybody's like, oh, we're all suffering. But for Black male and female architecture students, that number is upward in the hundreds of thousands. And a lot of people don't realize that huge burden is there. So compounding that on top of the cost of the AREs, that can be a huge challenge, especially not knowing about it. And the last, I want to talk about the AXP process, the experience program. Again, with that whole mentorship, sponsorship aspect, if you don't have someone who's in your corner, willing to even sign your experience packages, that can be a huge problem, getting someone to sort of actively mentor you and make sure you go through each of the points. Like, I know I've struggled a lot in terms of getting my supervisors to be on board and really taking this process seriously if I'm not like dogging them and sending them emails all the time to remind them. And the thing is that the profession does have a responsibility to help. I know it's not their job, but it's their responsibility as professionals to help foster those that come after them. And I feel like that's not being pushed as much. And I feel like in terms of that whole diversity aspect in architecture, that's one of the places where people in practice are failing the most. That's where they have the opportunity to make the most difference. And I feel like that's where they're actually failing the most in everyday practice. And in terms of my professional experiences, I've had a lot of similar experiences to Jessica in terms of microaggressions, especially in terms of hair, because I'm pretty freewheeling with my hair. I'm liable to walk in with anything on any day. But that's also prompted a lot of comments from everyone of all races and genders, and it's not a lot of fun. I would say in general that if you're not a Black woman with Black hair, you're probably just on the safer side not mentioning it. If you want to, say it looks nice, say nothing after that, and you'll be good. Because I've gotten some pretty wild comments, even from Black people telling me about, you know, the values they associate with whichever hairstyle I have at that particular time. And it's like, you have no idea what's going on under here. And it would honestly just be better if you just didn't bring it up. Because it's very frustrating to me when people start to have opinions on something they don't know about, not even just like commenting on what it looks like, but having an actual opinion on something they know nothing about. That's very, very frustrating to me. And that can be a whole cultural issue as well, in terms of what going into an office, not knowing what they consider professional or not. Like, I have an afro, but I've never worn it out into the office until I was working there for like several months, because I didn't feel comfortable wearing my actual hair out in the office because I was worried it might seem unprofessional. And luckily California has those restrictions on hair discrimination. I don't think Virginia has those. I should check. I don't think they do. But, you know, there can be whole things about cornrows and other different hairstyles. They're pretty open about dreads. But the thing for me with cornrows is that I'm also West African as part of my heritage. And for me, cornrows are a very, very professional, very respectable style. But for someone else, they seem hood or ghetto or unprofessional. And that can be a very frustrating balance to strike. So that's been something that I've kind of wrestled with. At my company, we have a Black employee network. I work at Jacobs, we're a fairly large organization. And we have a Black employee network to sort of, you know, create a community and help each other, mentor each other. They host lots of organizational events. They hosted a leadership summit last year. And the CEO of the company is the executive sponsor for the organization, which is pretty huge. And I would love for more people, not just at the executive level, but also at the sort of managerial level, the people leader level, to be that sort of invested in the employee networks or Black employee groups, because I feel like that's also where we can get a lot of change made. The people who have to deal with Black employees on an everyday basis, I feel like that would make a really huge change. And that relationship that you have with your manager can really make or break you as an architect. Like, I've had a lot of different types of managers, and some managers will make you throw up your hands and be like, I need to be out of this firm like tomorrow. And I feel like dealing with those difficult relationships, not just as a Black person, but also as a woman in architecture, can be very frustrating, because you sort of have to constantly be walking a fine line between, you know, standing up for yourself and being seen as aggressive or combative. And I've actually had situations where, you know, people say that I'm coming across as aggressive, but I'm not really. In my mind, I'm not. I'm actually babying people. Like, it's a very interesting dynamic. And I've had situations where people have complained to my manager about me being aggressive. And then when it all shakes out, it turns out that, you know, I was sending multiple emails politely asking people for stuff that they didn't give me. And all of it led up to this point. So it's just sort of dealing with those stereotypes and those perceptions of you, even if you think you're doing everything right to be seen as non-combative as possible, that can be very frustrating. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, that sounds very draining to have to watch yourself that way. I had a question about the HBCU. Does it open up more opportunity for mentorship after that? Does it help build your network? Have you found in your experience? Like, were you able to take some of that with you whenever you graduated?
Yeah, actually, all the people that I had as my personal sponsors when I was registering as an architect in Virginia, I met all of them through Hampton. And Hampton University also has a big brother, big sister program where alumni do come through and mentor you. And my big brother was also one of my sponsors for registration. So I would say it has a pretty big effect. You know, those connections are very important. And another interesting aspect is it introduces you to a lot of Black architects that you might not meet otherwise. Like, if they do come and visit your crits or come to your classroom, or if they're your big brother or sister, they say about 40% of HBCU architecture students know 5 or more Black architects. So I would sort of ask everybody on the call to sort of think, maybe list out all the Black architects you know, see if you can name more than 5. So that's a really interesting situation that happens because of HBCUs.
Yeah, it sounds like a very different experience, but it sounds like it's a really incredible one. I learned a lot about that just now.
It is. I just wanted to add, Rama, thank you so much for that. One person did come up, Isabel asked, where in Africa did you work? And she wanted to know, how did your experience in Africa compare to your experience here in the US? Which that was a question I had from myself. So inquiring minds want to know.
Mm-hmm. So I worked in Gambia for a short bit before I graduated. After graduation, I worked in Namibia, which is in Southern Africa, right above South Africa. And the experience there was very interesting because in some aspects, they're less formal than the States. So I was working in what would be considered over here, like a project architect position. But because, you know, there's less sort of rules around that kind of thing, I could sort of just jump in, be managing projects and stuff like that. But one of the hangups is that when you're in a different country, you're also dealing with different cultures. And so I would say that there are probably more restrictions on me because I was a woman working over there than I might have experienced over here. Like, for example, I was working on a project, again, sort of like in that project architect, project manager position. And I had a site visit that I needed to go to or attend on a project that I'd been working on for months. And the principal's like, no, you can't go. We have to send a guy instead because, you know, if you go up there, nobody's going to respect you. And that's Like I was mad, but I got it. And that's the kind of thing that you also have to deal with up there. To a certain extent, you might also have to deal with it in the States. People do still not take you seriously as a Black woman in general. Like if you're not like sitting there literally giving people directions, they're just going to assume you're kind of the secretary or something like that. So, I mean, you experience those kinds of things everywhere. One thing I did find frustrating was the registration process over there. Because when I was there, up until recently, they didn't have a master's program for architecture in the country, but they did require a master's in order to become a registered architect. So that was a huge obstacle for, you know, the people living there, and that I can't even become an architect in my own country with a degree I can get in my own country. Like that was really wild to me. They recently got their master's program, but it seemed a bit strange. So it's also resulted in a lot of foreign architects coming to work in the country because they're the only ones with the qualifications.
Interesting.
Wow.
Well, I think you said a lot of things that make perfect sense. And I think one of the things, I mean, coming from Howard, the other HU, Howard, this is where I went to school. I think, you know, I can actually name off 10 people that I know that were getting an architectural degree. I could probably name off 10 or 15 civil engineers that were amazing in terms of what they did. And I think HBCUs have historically been overlooked when it comes to mining talent for the design industry. I've told every firm leader that would listen that you need to start visiting these schools. You need to start getting with these students early and often. And I think, again, now that more dialogue is happening, it could probably convince more people to do some things that they wouldn't necessarily spend money on previously. Now's the time to start opening up and asking those questions. The other thing that I'm definitely going to bring up with some firm leaders that I know that are leaders of firms of upwards of over 1,000 plus people is, and I didn't realize this, and I should have, but you bring up a good point about just sometimes the lack of having the supplies and things that you need in school itself, and how sometimes that can also help the process. The cost of taking exams. I mean, those are all things that we tend to overlook. We just look at somebody that's a newly minted architect and say, okay, it's all great, but there's so much that requires that has to be done to get you to that point. And I think we forget about that part of it. And I think it's important. And honestly, I think it's a great recruitment tool for firms to try to support that part of the process, because if I was an architect if I was studying architecture coming out of school, I'd be more inclined to look at a firm that was trying to support my program, that was trying to potentially support me and other architects that are trying to do the same thing. So I think it's a really great idea to try to promote more of that. Not to look at it as a handout, but it's like, listen, this is a perfect pool of people that can come in and be a part of what your organization is doing. So I'm glad you mentioned that, and I appreciate that, and thank you for sharing those stories.
Mm-hmm. Talking about mining talent, like I remember during the career fairs, when I was in school, it's changed a bit now, but when I was in school, like you'd go to the career fairs, but it was kind of a waste of time because there were no architecture firms there. You could maybe go to the Army desk for the Army Corps of Engineers, but there were no architecture firms there for you.
Yeah,
So
that's been a problem though. I mean, historically, architectural firms outside of maybe a few, they did not spend the time going back even to their alma maters to develop the talent that was there. And that's a shame, because it's like, it's kind of like built in. If I was an architect, I would have been going back to Howard every year to I would have just had a pipeline, and you almost have to create that and encourage firm leaders to look at that as a simple way to develop new talent, especially diverse talent, like yourself and everybody else that's on this call.
mm-hmm.
Yeah. Excellent discussion. I appreciate how you took a different route and brought up HBCUs and teach us more about that. So next, we'll do Randall.
What's up, you guys? Thank you, Adam, for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming.
Nice to meet all of you. everything you guys were talking about was just like bam, 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 hitting the nail on the head. You know what I'm saying? So it's like I don't know, like I don't even know which part to talk about first, but I had no professional experience and like I never interned yet. I just graduated in May, so it's like I'm just fresh. But yeah, for whatever reason, I went to a PWI called Louisiana Tech first, and then I went for engineering because it was like the best and cheapest school to attend in Louisiana for engineering, and I had like TOPS, which is this funding that we get in Louisiana that a lot of people don't really get in other states. But yeah, if you stay in state, you get like basically half your tuition covered, and I basically transferred to UL because I wanted to do architecture since I was in like 11th grade in high school, and I just realized like tech was not the school for that. So when I transferred to UL, I was expected to like start over in a sense, but they didn't make me start over up until my third year. Like they made me go into second year, then I had to like go back and take this prereq of first year, and it was just like a bunch of design stuff, like easy stuff. And I had to retake that. So I once was in a class with like 6 Black people in like architecture. Then when I went into my junior year, I was like one of, it probably was like 6 of us again, but my senior year, it was only 2 of us that graduated. So just to get those numbers out of there. But I was the only male, and then we had 1 female that graduated. But I noticed when I was in third year, so basically one of the people that I know had some type of leadership position, and then another guy that recently retired. I know a lot of us in the call, like some of my friends and families in the call, they probably know who I'm talking about. But like, I'm not gonna respectfully say no names, but like, it was obvious that these was like the people like Jessica mentioned, like the people that was like psychotic, or they kind of tried to like, you know what I'm saying, like cover it up in a sense. And it's like, it's really just not professional, and like it held me back. But then it also made me like realize that I need to be like better. Like I didn't let it, you know what I'm saying? Like I didn't let it tear me down. And some people didn't have that. Like I had support from family and friends. You know, I used to talk to them about this, and they could not even imagine what I went through. Like they really like don't be knowing. Like so, I know that I recently said that I was gonna get involved into more of these things because I was like once a shy person. So I'm not one of those people that will be like, okay, I need help, or just randomly walk up to somebody, especially if I feel like I shouldn't even be there. Like I don't even know how to explain. Like I didn't really voice. I feel like so we used to have critiques at nighttime or whatever. Then like I basically can say the school lacked support in a sense. Like they really didn't know until like my senior year of what I was capable of. Like my senior year is my only time I made like A's like in architecture in my studios. So you know what I'm saying? There's a lot of bias, and I could just remember getting like, you know what I'm saying, like I want to say like feedback from incompetent professors or advisors. Like I didn't know what classes to take. It was just a bunch of things. Like I feel like if we paying for education, like these things should be offered. Like I don't know, I don't even know how else to explain it, but it's crazy. So it's like we would have night critiques. I would literally be sitting there along with everybody else, and I've been walked over like twice. Like I had to follow the professor outside the building and show images from my phone. Like he didn't even want to walk back inside. Like it's crazy though. It's crazy. So it's like, and then it's just a whole nother level of respect and classmates, because like you can mention an idea. Like I could tell you recently, my senior year, and I'm getting more recognition my senior year. Like I'm telling you, like me and one other person actually was compensated for our projects over like the rest of the class, and it's crazy. So it's like I don't know why I thought like I was beneath people, but when COVID happened and we really started doing everything at home, it really showed me who had that support from the professors and who didn't, and like what set me apart, because I didn't really have help like talking about. But I recently joined Nomas and talked to a few people, and like I even got on LinkedIn, like just trying to update my professional life, and just I really came across people that like Black architects that's in other schools. And like one guy from Kenshaw State, he like his family, I'm like a first year graduate of my family, like a first year generation grad. So it's like this guy, he told me that he had family that graduated, and basically he knew what school to search for, and not to be in debt as much. And it's just a bunch of stuff that I didn't have, and just I really was appreciative of myself for like breaking those boundaries and reaching out to people that I didn't know. And like he really told me a lot of stuff about the design industry, and he's worked since he was like a junior in at Kenshaw State, and like that their program is a 5-year program, and he just graduated as well. So it's like he been having a job because of his own talents and because of his own like family having that college, experience, telling him like research, like find out how to do things. This is how you do that. Like, so he got out of school like on time for his sake, but like I could have originally, like if I came straight out of high school knowing what I know now, I could have originally graduated at like 21 years old, like 2018. So it's like the sponsorship and like just the, I don't know, like but anyway, special shout out to Miss Kawana. I see she's in the audience. She's a great, great mentor, like that helped me really, 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 really get up on my feet and really like just show out. And like she really pointed a lot of things out to me and told me just to keep my composure and a lot of things, you know what I'm saying? So I really appreciate you ladies talking about y'all experiences in the workplace, because it's like I don't want to experience that and feel like it's okay. So it's like I'ma just go where my heart tells me to go, and like I'ma just try to like, make the best out of the whole architect experience. And it's just one other thing I want to point out, the end card board. I feel like people who's never been in spaces, like I feel like it just needs to be more diverse. Like I don't know if I'm gonna be that person that has to like go and try to get that position or whatever. I hope it don't even take that long. Like it shouldn't take that long, but like I feel like they need to at least just, I don't care if it has to be a Hispanic person or anything, like they need to have one different person. It's like literally, and it's only one female who's white and the rest of them are white males. So it just makes you really intimidated to even try, you know what I'm saying? Like it's crazy though, but yeah. So Adam.
Dude, all this and you did it. You graduated.
Yeah.
Man. Where do we start? Yeah. So you said that you're about to go into your master's, right?
Yes, in the fall.
Do you feel like through the people that you've met so far, do you feel like you're going to be able to build a system, a mentor system or networking system? Do you feel like you have the ability to do that in the next couple of years, knowing what's coming ahead?
Yes, I really feel like I have now. Like even some of my classmates I've recently started talking with, like they've been supporting me. Like they like this one girl, Helena, like she's really, really, really like helpful and like cool. Like she was in my group for a year, and like I never realized, like she's calling out a lot of the stuff that happens in the classroom, and basically she noticed when I'm overlooked and my other peer was overlooked, who's African American. So it's like that like means something on a big level. And it's like I tried to reach out to some of the people, and I can remember when COVID happened, I reached out and thought about, I was like, let's share Google Drive and like critique each other's work, because we don't really have, our professors not giving us adequate feedback because they don't have time, they working on other stuff. So I just threw the idea out there, and it's like nobody, like they liked the message, nobody really like responded besides those who were in my group. And like we did it, and then I met with some people who's graduate students who's people of color. Like we have this guy who's El Salvador, and we have like 3 Black students, and we were like, I was getting feedback from them, and like I said, the guy from LinkedIn. So it's like, but I realized my classmates, like they really don't, like they'll really look at you, say something, and it's like they have to think twice, or it takes one other person for them to just really respond or even like wanna, you know what I'm saying, participate in something you have to offer. Like it's crazy. And I was like, it only benefits us. Like I made sure I put that attached to the message, and it was like they still didn't reach out. And I can remember like one of my friends who's going into 4th year now, I have two friends that's third year students that's going into 4 year now. He was telling me that he thought about buying a printer for the class and asked everybody to chip in, and nobody like responded or anything. But when a white guy did it in the class, they all did it. So it's like, why is this a thing? Like, you know what I'm saying? So it's like imposter syndrome, like somebody said in the comments. But yeah.
I have a question for you. Do you what space do you want to go into when you graduate? Have you thought about that in terms of the type of architectural work you want to
Architecture,
do?
I wanted to aviation, but like I'm thinking like now because of everything that's going on, I want to go into residential and just focus on like. So I'm a part of Nomis, and I recently went on this trip and spoke about affordable housing. When we have these different meetings, and we went to like two places, Louisiana Corp and somewhere else in New Orleans. I can't remember like the top of my head, but we basically were speaking about affordable housing and how hard is it for like Black people to get developers to even be a part of their like projects and things like that. So it's like I wanted to like go into housing and really like break those boundaries and try to figure those things out as well.
Okay. Are you planning to stay in Louisiana, or are you going to leave?
Oh, I already sought for my license to be done in Texas. So
Okay.
You've decided.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, be sure connect with me afterwards. I'd like to introduce you to somebody I think would be a really solid architect that does a lot of residential and mixed use projects. Won all kinds of awards. I think he'd be somebody you should connect with. You know, I think it's important to do that. So.
okay, I
And
appreciate that.
yeah, so we'll connect afterwards. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Randall.
I think Adam, somebody said on there, you know, and I think it's just it's probably emblematic for what we're going to experience. And I think you know, as all my brown and Black brothers and sisters will attest to, you know, a lot of times we do a good job of having each other's back, especially when dealing with this kind of stuff. And so I think it's important that each and every one of you on this call should never feel like you're alone, and that there's always going to be somebody there that will be willing to advocate and give you advice, you know, and you know, and give you some guidance that will be helpful throughout this process, because it is a journey. And you know, again, every time I hear something come out of your mouth that isn't, you know, what I think you should be experiencing, I'm disheartened, but at the same time, I'm encouraged, because, you know, with groups like these coming together, there's a lot that you guys realize that you can do. You have the power to overcome a lot of the obstacles that are right in front of you, some of which are man-made and others that are more systemic more than anything else. So I just want to encourage you, you have to keep fighting and pushing through, because there are people out there that really do want to see you guys succeed and be the best that you can be. I mean, hey, bottom line, we just don't have enough architects and engineers, period, anyway. But we need good Black and brown architects and engineers. So take that for what it's worth.
Worth its weight in gold.
Yeah.
So we'll cut this one a little short. That way we can extend the back end. We had 5 minutes left on this one. Appreciate your perspective. I love that you're coming in from the school side, and you can kind of see where you're heading. We can talk about that. So I really appreciate your perspective here. Let's move on to the final panelist, Ms. Faye.
Hi, everyone. So I'm just gonna mostly talk about the resources side of my journey into architecture. So like Jessica, I grew up in a suburban area. I'm in the Washington, D.C. metro area, but my suburb was all Black. So when I was in school, everyone was an engineer from Howard University, or they were a doctor or a lawyer, or dentist, something in the medical field. And I always knew that I had this creative side of me. So I was like, I just want to see what I can do. I was good at math. I was good at art. What field could I go in that sparked my interest? And I didn't meet my first Black architect until my sophomore year of high school. And that was my drafting teacher in my magnet program at my school. And that was when I automatically fell in love with architecture. And after graduating, I was able to find resources to get into pre-college because no one really prepares you how to make your portfolio to get into school. It's just like, okay, you put together some art pieces and then you just wish on a star and then you get into a program. But the biggest thing for me was I want to go to a 5-year program. I want to get my B.Arch. I didn't want to get a Bachelor of Science, Bachelor of Art. And I knew once I got my 5-year degree, come back to DC and just start working. But there weren't many programs that were HBCUs that were B.Arch except Howard, I think. And all the other programs that were top 10 were PWIs. And it was a bit of a struggle for me being like, okay, both of my parents are Howard graduates, don't want to be a legacy, but they're not giving me any financial aid. So the school that was able to give me financial aid, and the most of it was probably the most expensive school, but I would not trade that for the world. So I went to Carnegie Mellon University. Like Jessica said, they had a pre-orientation program for all of the minority students. And it was so great seeing all of these beautiful Black people in excelling at school. And when I went to my program, it was interesting, the culture shock that I had. So there were about 65 of us and only 4 of us were Black, 3 women, 1 male. And in the whole program, there were 6 Black people in the undergrad program. And probably 1 Black person each year, and then the 4 of us. And so there were always jokes like, oh my goodness, you met our quota for the next 4 years. Like, and it was just like, okay, cool. That's the first experience I'm getting in architecture school. But fortunately, my class was amazing. Like, they were very open to hearing experiences. They weren't really prejudiced at all. Most of the issues that I had was with my professors. A lot of the tenured professors who thought they were untouchable and they could say whatever they want to students. They could say whatever they want in critiques. The favoritism, it was very interesting how professors picked their favorites very early on in the semester. And you can tell which students had more resources, definitely. And also not just resources like architectural materials, or like books and stuff, it's just the advice they would give to certain students. Xavier was saying, I definitely felt imposter syndrome after my first semester. Realizing that you can only get mediocre grades when you're doing work that has meaningful impact, but if you don't have these grandeur schemes, you're just kind of like swept under the rug. And so very early on, I was just told, if you don't have these big ideas that aren't seen as unrealistic or things like that, you're just going to pass by just with grades. If you want to make impact, you're going to have basically get C's. And hearing that from professors, it's just like, what do you expect me to fail coming into this program? And I think the biggest shift in my experience going into architecture was my 3rd year. A couple of my classmates are on, so I think they know the story I'm going to talk about. We were in an environmental engineering lecture. And this professor just had a day where he was just coming after all of the minority students. So he had made a comment, a prejudice, I will say racist comment, to an Asian student in our class about something that had to do with the lesson he was teaching today. And then there was another point in the lecture where he pointed at me directly and asked if I'd come from a low-income neighborhood, and the only reason why I was at the school was because of affirmative action. And literally, I'm shaking in my seat, wondering why am I in this class, in this lecture, trying to get the same education as the other people in this class, and you're targeting me just because of the way I look. And fortunately, they all came up, I'm sorry, I'm still a little bit shaking about this, but telling me like, you need to speak up about this. And this was actually the semester I almost dropped out of architecture and just went back to engineering. I just did not feel like I had much support. And thankfully, my classmates were like, hey, go to the head of the school, tell them what happened. And fortunately, since he was tenured, he wasn't able to like be fired or anything, but he was not allowed to teach that class anymore. And realizing when I talked to the other Black people in the program, they're like, yeah, oh, he says this stuff about all the time. He called us monkeys one time, he called us like slaves. And I'm like, why would y'all let this happen? And they're just like, no one was going to do anything. Like, you were the first person to speak up. And at that point I was like, why did I have to be the first person to speak up? I'm happy that I did, but that was the time that I really did find my voice in the program. It was like, okay, I can use my voice to make a difference in this program and in this profession. That was also the year that a mentor of mine and a student was able to help us charter the NOMAS chapter at our school. Yeah, so that was really great. And that was the second time I had met my second Black architect. She was a PhD professor at Carnegie Mellon. And at that point, I'm realizing there are not many ways for Black professors and educators to get into the educational side of architecture. And actually, one of my classmates at NUM, she had asked that question, like, what are some steps we can incorporate Black architects? And I think it's just, there are Black architects out there. It's finding the ways to reach out to them. Because we're all here, we have the knowledge, we have the resources, but if you're not looking for us, how do we know where to reach out to? And that was another thing too when I graduated, finding work. Because everyone talks about, okay, yeah, as soon as you get out of senior year or your master's program, you're automatically gonna get a job. It took me 2 or 3 months to find a position. And a lot of it was just like, okay, you hear the things of, oh yeah, if your name doesn't sound white passing, it's a little bit harder for you to get your name, even your foot in the door. And if you don't have mentors to reach out to, if you don't have those networks, you're just stuck. And fortunately, the first firm that I worked for was an amazing small business owner, but the firm was diverse. I immediately was mentored by 2 of the Black architects and all the women in the firm. So all the resources that I was lacking earlier on, I was able to pick up. And like Rama was saying, the biggest things are resources, that the money for the ARE exams, you're paying for so many things. You're paying for your student loans if you had that, you have your car note, you have all the life bills that you're paying for, and you're trying to save up for this 1,400 exam that you don't even pass on the first try. And even if you do, you have to find the materials that work for you. You have to find the time. And working 60-hour work weeks and trying to find time to still find time in your day to study for these exams and pass them is a lot. And it takes a lot on your mental health. It takes a lot on your physical health. And I think that people just assume, okay, yeah, you have the same experiences that we do. You can do it because I got mine done in 6 months. Or I passed my 7 exams in 7 weeks. And it's like, yeah, that's great. That was your experience, but that's not mine, you know? So I think my biggest thing now is focusing on, once I get my license, becoming the Black architect that I did not see growing up. So making sure that my community has resources for younger students to see successful Black architects and successful Black engineers growing up, and having the resources, scholarships and books and just mentors to be able to succeed. Because although I did not have that experience, I was still able to gain valuable insight, and I want to be able to have them help younger students get a head start. So I think that's pretty much my summarized experience.
Thank you. Yeah, when you're ready to do that, just know that Next Architects can support you.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's awesome.
you'll always have a voice there. But that sounds incredible. You're going to do great things.
Thank you. And I will also say that there are a lot of allies that are fighting. I really want to thank, there's so many people who have been willing to listen. The biggest thing is just being willing to listen and being able to give help and being able to use your privilege to help other people get to where you are. And it's not, don't feel guilty, because that's just the cards that you were dealt. You know, just use the cards that you were dealt to help bring other people up to where you are. But there are a lot of great allies in this space. All of the classmates that I had in school, all of the people that I've been working with, I'm fortunate that the microaggressions I do get, it's the hair, but it's mostly, oh, it's because you're a woman in architecture, not because you're Black. But it's like, those things come hand in hand. I'm a Black woman, and both of those play into my daily experiences of an architect. So. just being able to speak up and not being afraid to speak out against things that are going on.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Faye.
Yeah. Well said. Well said.
Thank you.
If I could add, I was reading a lot of the comments that were flying by, and you know, I do want to say, I want to point something out. First of all, the last thing you said, Faye, is so appropriate, is that we do need to, where and when possible, lean on our white brothers and sisters that are willing to advocate and are willing to work with us and help us out. Can we do it all by ourselves? No. Can anybody do it all by themselves? Absolutely not. It does take a village in everything that we do to get to where we want to go. I did want to say something that I saw a couple people respond to with when you were speaking, was that, you know, the who you know, not what you know, is another problem. My only simple response to that is that, getting back to what you just said, there's always going to be somebody out there willing to advocate. And I do believe that, you know, for a lot of you, you're all, I mean, everything that you're doing in this space, you're supremely talented. Your acumen and your book smarts are way above normal. So you have all of that. The thing that I really want to encourage everybody that's here is, you need to become supreme relationship builders that push through all of the BS and the systemic stuff that you're dealing with, to identify and find those advocates that are out there that can help you, both black and white, to ultimately get to what you want, where you want to go. And yes, it is a problem systemically in the schools. And I think somebody posted the number. I think there's only 117 black professors. You know, and so we need to do a lot more to get more black professors in this space, especially in the architectural space. And so some of you need to figure out a time when you can do some adjunct work beyond what you're doing with your organizations. And I know I'm throwing more on your plate, but that's something else that you can esteem to look forward to doing in the future. But I want to get back to this whole thing about relationships. Relationships are everything. And I think that a lot of times it really is who you know, period, end of story. And that's why a lot of other people get the jobs that they get, but it's incumbent upon us to be able to exercise those as well, and to let folks know that we're here, we're not going anywhere, and we need help just like anybody else. And so I think you need to be able to do that. And I don't really have a parallel story to say, although I will say this. When I moved to Fayetteville, Arkansas, which is about as white as it can be, and it's a great place. Northwest Arkansas is great. We've got Walmart, J.B. Hunt, Tyson. I actually had to lean on all white people to open up doors for me in this area because I didn't know anybody here. And it worked. Now I know a lot of black people that I didn't know before. But how did I get to know them? Actually, through some of the white people that I met. So I think we need to be mindful about developing that relationship development muscle that I know we all have. Some of us get a little uncomfortable about trying to go out and create those because we don't want to be fake or anything like that. I'm just here to tell you, you need to exercise that muscle, because with relationships, I believe all things are possible. Without them, it's hard for you, no matter how well you did in school, to get where you want to go. And I mean, I know you guys all know that, but it bears repeating. And I got a couple of years on all of you guys. I'm telling you, I would not be where I am today if it were not for relationships, period, end of story. And if you're having a hard time developing those, I actually have some tips and some ideas that I'm going to share with you guys off camera that I think will be really beneficial, just to go out there and be intentional about how you continue to build your, and I'm going to date myself now, your Rolodex. So take that for what it's worth, because I think it will benefit you.
Randy, I definitely agree. One thing I would encourage people to do is check out that Equity by Design study done by the AIA San Francisco. It actually shows the numbers that in terms of promotion material for executive leadership, what they look at most is 1, project outcomes, and 2, client relationships. So what you're talking about is very important, because a lot of people don't really know what they have to do to take the next step forward, but those relationships are actually what can sort of make or break you. And a lot of people coming out of architecture school think, oh, my portfolio will speak for itself. Oh, my thesis will sort of speak for itself. It'll speak for me. I don't have to speak to these people. I can just hit the one-click apply on LinkedIn with 1,000 other people, and the portfolio will just work its magic. But that's not how it actually works in the
No.
real world when it comes to jobs. I know for the company I'm currently working at, referrals are a huge portion of where we get our new employees. And a lot of people like to think that architecture is a meritocracy. Of course, to a certain extent, you know, getting your degree and being a great architect are very important, but who you know is extremely, extremely critical. And it can be the difference between you getting that job or not.
Yeah, it's everything. And then once you get the job, when you go out and develop relationships with the clients, like I always tell people in our trainings, friends don't fire friends. So when you go out and you can go out and create a transactional relationship with a client, well, they'll take, and there's an architect on every corner. But when you develop a true relationship with a client and you're friends with them, then it's hard for them to separate themselves from what you do and what you represent to them with the scope of work that you're able to help them out with. So I think that's huge.
Yeah, so we're doing really good on time. Was there anything anyone wanted to revisit, bring up, something they didn't think about before?
I wanted to make sure that I act, so Arzavia, since you just finished school, I know that we already asked you like what you think you want to do in the field, but I just want to make sure, do you feel like, you had mentioned that us speaking made you feel as if you know what is not normal in the workplace, you know what to not deal with, but do you feel as if you have any gaps as far as feeling equipped and how to advocate for yourself?
Somewhat, yes, because like I said, like I only have like one true mentor, and I know I have my mom's husband, he's an architect, a black architect, but he's only worked in Louisiana, so that's kind of like not what I'm trying to be. So I kind of like have somebody to like speak with on those things, but like everybody's busy, especially now, so it's like
Yes.
not so much. You know, and then I have some people in my family. I have a cousin and an aunt that's engineers, and it's like they tell me about what to expect in the workplace and how do you get to where like you really have like to almost double work yourself, and then it make us age more. Like it's unfair in a sense, you know what I'm saying? So it's like, but no, I don't know. I don't really have any straightforward connections as far as getting a job yet, or like, you know, like I send my portfolio to people and then I try to, but everybody's just really busy at the time. So it's
Yeah,
like, and I'm still working on everything at the same time.
and I would say like most firms stopped hiring. So don't put so much pressure on yourself to get a job. As far as like, I think people are going to be very understanding that if you say you were graduating class of 2020, that
Yeah.
like it's very real. And you're going to grad school, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Correct.
So it's actually, that's a huge blessing in and of itself.
Yeah,
But
it
yeah,
is.
I guess I don't want to leave on a negative note as far as my stories of sharing like the sad side.
Yeah.
I guess I can share that that my speaking skills, my ability to handle tension very well, my ability to hold my composure with the client at such a young age really did make it so that I was not on the chopping block in a lot of the situations where people were being unprofessional towards me. I guess like I really had to learn that the proof was in the pudding. I had to, and there were situations where I was disappointed I didn't fight and advocate for myself more, but I think like I'm gonna try like kill them with kindness, I guess is my advice. End of the day, there were times I really wanted to explode and I had to go, and just like what Randy had said, some of the best advocates I had were people of other color in like, whether it was my engineer, very close friend who was a white woman, whether it was my Latina coworker, whether it was my Asian coworker, all being like, you can talk to me at lunch. So that stuff really helped me work through things and helped me develop relationships within the firm in order to know how to navigate people, because it really is like all firms, big or small, it's politics and it's favoritism. But I think the proof is in the pudding, and that it can all be overcome. I don't want you to feel like,
Yeah.
and also as a man, hopefully you won't have to deal with some of the stuff we talked about, but
Yeah.
it's real. Like, it's like people,
But like the hair and everything
yeah,
is like,
hopefully not as bad.
you look, yeah, they make it is a lot of stuff. Like, but yeah, so
Yeah.
it's challenging, but it makes you really go harder. So at the end of the day, I'm very
Yeah.
appreciative of all my experiences. Like, and I'm appreciative of the ones that I didn't have to go through, like you guys.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Good. I'm glad you're so hopeful. And then I'd love to, I had a few questions that I had in the back of my head as far as like, what I have a lot of optimism out of this moment, as far as the fact that there's a lot of civil rights talks and a lot of realization that there's not enough African-American talent in a lot of different fields. But what are we expecting as far as concrete things that we could ask for out of, like, the quickest thing that I get from people whenever I say, you need to hire more people of color at this company, you need to try harder. I tell them, you can recruit at HBCUs, like stop recruiting at the same places that you recruit at every year if they're not showing diversity. But most of the time the response is like, there's not enough of you out there. So if any of you have faced those same questions or challenges from your boss as far as why there's not enough diversity, how did you deal with it?
One thing I kind of respond, I haven't really had you hear people making that excuse all the time, but the thing is, realistically, there are plenty of architecture graduates out there. Like, probably a lot of you know that there's only like around 400 Black women architects in the United States. And that number is like that because maybe 0.5% of the Black women architects that graduate with an architecture degree actually go on to be licensed. And that's a huge problem. And part of that is because these firms will not hire, will not hire, but do not hire Black women architects. And I had a similar issue to Faye, where I was unemployed for a long time after I came back from Africa. I think I was unemployed for about 6 months. And it was really sort of that personal connection and networking that enabled me to get the job that I currently have. So I would say, unless you like personally know someone, you're gonna have a lot of challenges going in the industry.
We'll
Yeah,
also
I
say
think.
sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, please. Go ahead. I'll save my comment. Go ahead.
Okay. But I think also when you are applying to places and you do get those interviews, your gut will tell you whether that's a good firm for you or not. Like, you are interviewing those firms and that leadership of your place. Like, you have to ask the questions, okay, yeah, I want to be here, but you need me just as much as I need you.
Right.
And not just to fill some diversity quota.
No.
Like, if you do see people in leadership, make sure they're not the diversity chair of so-and-so, and that's the only Black person you see on their leadership. Like, make sure they actually care about your growth, because that's another thing of this advocacy. You have to make sure that you are doing this for you. I was able to get all of my hours because I had a great leader, I had great principals that were able to help me get all the hours that I needed to work on. And I think that's another thing, like Jessica and Rama were saying, make sure you advocate for yourself, because you have to be your biggest fighter.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I was definitely on mute. So I was looking through some questions in the chat. There's a lot of good ones. So I just wanted to go through them, and whoever wants to answer them, feel free to answer. So the first question I have, for people who are still in school, what's the best way to go about finding mentors, especially if you attend a PWI?
Well, since I went to a PWI, I was able to find my mentors through NOMAS. Um, and not just through NOMAS, I cold called a lot of architecture firms. I had trouble finding internships even while I was in school. And hearing all of my classmates like being able to find stuff through family friends and contacts and stuff, I'm just like, I don't have that. So I literally just spent a day just calling firms in DC. Hey, do you have internships available? And fortunately, I had a firm owner. She was able to give me a internship, but we met for lunch and we talked about the profession. And this was the same year all of that crazy stuff with the professor happened. And she reignited my passion for architecture. Like, I don't think I would have been in architecture if she just did not sit down and have that lunch with me. And I had my first mentor that way. Sometimes you just have to go out and go to these conferences. AIS conference, I met so many people on the list here that are here attendees from the AIS conference, and we are all doing amazing things now through NOMAS, through some, even your professors have, like, your school might have an alumni network. Go through the alumni network too. But it just takes it's hard. It's unfortunate that you have to do all of this work to find the people to help you get to where you need to be, but it will be so much more rewarding once you do that work.
Yeah.
Let me also put this out there. I don't know if you guys have noticed lately, but like, of course, since George Floyd's death, I've seen one article after another highlighting Black interior designers, Black architects. Whenever you see those, reach out to that person, connect with them on LinkedIn. You know, say, hey, I read that article about you. It was amazing. Your story is amazing. Because all these stories have been amazing. It's like all of a sudden, it's like these people just came out of nowhere. And I'm like, no, they've been here all this time. Everybody has just chosen to give them a platform. My point is, when you see people like that, don't assume that you can't reach them and touch them. I have reached out to no shorter than about 11 or 12 people that I have read about, either through a LinkedIn article or through something that somebody else has shared with me. Madam Architect does a lot of really good pieces on black architects lately. I would highly recommend that you read Madam Architect. Even if you're a dude, read Madam Architect. There's a lot of really good articles in there. But
I actually knew the founder of it.
What'd you say?
The founder of it's actually one of my classmates.
Oh, okay. That's right.
Yeah.
She's from Cornell, right? Yeah,
Julia,
yes. What's her name?
Julia, yeah.
Right. Yes. She's solid. I've connected with her. We've spoken. I'm actually trying to get her on my podcast, but that's a whole nother story. Just make those connections, because you'd be surprised. Every time I see a story like that, I'm encouraged. And I think you guys, in terms of where you are, sometimes you feel like you're on an island by yourself, but you really aren't. And nowadays, I mean, we've got these tools at our disposal. There's no excuse. I don't care where you are. Just reach out to folks, connect with them on LinkedIn, connect with them, even if they take 3 weeks to get back to you. I've had people connect with me like 5 weeks later, and then I start talking to them, and that's when the conversation starts. Make the time to do that. You know, and it's from a mentoring perspective. I teach a lot on mentoring, and I'm going to say this to you. First of all, there are good mentors and there are great mentors. Every mentor isn't necessarily going to be somebody in your organization. A lot of times you need to look outside of your organization to find a good mentor. And I will say this, that it doesn't actually always have to be an architect. And I know that might sound like heresy, right? Because then you're saying, well, Randy, they can't speak to my experience. But if they're successful, they know how to communicate, they've built a strong network, they know a lot of people, you don't know what path that will lead you down. So I really want to encourage you, from a mentor, when you're out seeking mentors, and maybe you're having a hard time finding an architectural mentor, I think you can probably find one. But let's just say you're struggling with that. Just find a good mentor. Somebody that can speak knowledge and wisdom into your life, that can give you some things to hang your hat on when it comes to how you handle yourself in those precarious situations that some of you have mentioned tonight. And you know, they will help you in the process. And then you'll eventually find somebody that maybe you'll find a Black older architect mentor, right? But maybe you won't. Maybe it's a white older architect mentor. You'll find one. But the bottom line is, identify somebody that A, is interested in you, and is willing to have that conversation and is also willing to open up doors, because part of the mentoring is not just what they can share with you, but they can also open up other resources to you that you sometimes lose sight of. And so I would just encourage you, when you're thinking about mentoring, it's okay to go out and reach out to people. If I was in your position now as a young architect, I'd probably be reaching out to every older Black architect that I could find until somebody would say yes, and then I could have a conversation with them and see where we go from there. Because it's not always this perfect storm scenario where somebody's just going to show up at work one day and all of a sudden that they're going to be your best bud, and that's going to be your mentor. Sometimes it takes work to find the person that can really speak into your life. And I would not trivialize it, and I would certainly take time to identify someone that you can get along with and that you can also be transparent with. Because if you work with a mentor and you can't bear yourself to them, then they're not really a mentor. So just my 2 cents on that.
Yeah. So I guess, because I'm at 6 years out of school. Most of my mentors came from college experiences, or I've made them a few years ago, but I find it very hard to keep those relationships up, especially when it's a thing where I just see them at a conference every now and then. And I've been very honored to be, like, a lot of people have reached out to me recently, but it's one of those things where all I say is like, yeah, I'm okay. Like, there's a lot going on right now, but I can't really expand too in depth on it. It's hard for me to continue having deep-seated relationships with some of these people that do mean a lot to me, but it's just one of those things where it's hard for a lot of people to get the ball rolling. And I think I'm pretty well spoken. And if I feel that way, I'm sure many other architects feel more intense. So do you have any advice as far as, like, just topics, like, what you can't just bare your soul to someone based off of an email or a DM on LinkedIn or whatever?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I agree. Well, first of all, I just want to acknowledge that I think the issue that we're probably all dealing with is that it just gets tiring after a while, like real tiring. I can't tell you the number of emails that I get from people asking me how I'm feeling. How are you doing? I had no idea it was this bad. I suck, or what, it's all these different things, usually from a lot of my good white friends, male and female. But I think it's the thing that we have to do is there's going to only, my grandmother taught me this a long time ago. You're only going to have a couple of core friends, right? You're going to have a lot of associates. And so I think you have to be mindful of that. And you have to have a conversation that you can have with some people that you're not going to be able to have with others. And you need to recognize where that is, where you're not going to lay it all out on the line for everybody. But for some, you will bare your soul, right? Because I don't think that you should throw your pearls before swine anyway. I think you should always be mindful of that and be careful about who you're sharing your true heart with. But those that show themselves and show their true colors as someone that you can trust and that will be a good ear. Because I think the biggest struggle that we have right now is that people just aren't listening. It's the reason why we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. We need to listen more and talk less. And so I would err on the side of those that tend to really listen to me, and those that I know listen when I give advice, or if I'm looking for guidance. They're the ones that are talking a lot less, but listening and allowing me to convey my feelings and thoughts. Those are the ones that I would spend a majority of my time with. And I mean, you kind of know who those people are. You have an idea, and you probably now, with everything going on, know that there's some people that you probably need to spend less time with, just because it's the way that it is. And that's the unfortunate side effect of what we're going on, is that people are unfriending people on Facebook. They are just kind of moving away from talking to people on a regular basis, just because it is too exhausting to have to say the same thing over and over again to everyone. So, I mean, those are some of the challenges that you're going to face, and you're going to have to pick and choose your battles. I don't know that there is one right answer to it, but that is it. That's the thing. I mean, you're going to have to look at, who is really in my corner and has my back. I know who has my back. You should be kind of aware of who has your back. Those are the people that you're going to really bear all with. And outside of them, the rest of them, that doesn't really matter from that perspective, until somebody shows themselves approved and you're saying, you know what, I want to share some more with this person. So I'm going to open up a little bit more and let them see who the real me is. And at that point, that's when you can really share with them. But I wouldn't, I wouldn't feel like I've got to open up to everybody. And especially now, because everybody wants every Black person to talk to them about what's going on, Black and white. But I mean, primarily our white brothers and sisters. And that's it. I mean, that's just the way that it is. And I want to say this very clearly so that you hear me. And this is for everybody listening, is it's not an us versus them mentality that we need to operate from. We all need to understand how we are dealing with this system that we're in the United States. And until we can come to a place where we can have real conversation and be transparent about how we feel, we're never going to get beyond that. And so I want to encourage you guys to be able to have those hard conversations when necessary, and do it in a way where it's not like, you screwed up and this is all your fault to begin with, because that's not going to get us anywhere, right? And I think, I think a perfect example of what we're dealing with right now is, what a lot of people asked Nelson Mandela when he got out of jail. One of the things that a lot of white people in South Africa were fearing their lives. They thought, oh man, he's just gonna let loose on us, and it's gonna be crazy because there's 27 million Blacks in South Africa and only 3 million whites. So the odds were against them, right? And Nelson Mandela, one of the first things he said was, my focus is on reconciliation. How do we reconcile with each other and truly become brothers and sisters here in South Africa? And I honestly think that we need to have that same mindset and mentality here in the States. As hard as that sounds, we need to get to that. And we've never gotten to that type of reconciliation. Never. Let's be clear about this. And I honestly think for a lot of times, because people keep asking me, is this different than a lot of other things that we've seen? Yeah, it is. And I think we need to use the springboard that is the life of George Floyd and his death to really make something special happen. And it's going to require all of us to step up our game, to have real conversation and real talk with people. And people are going to have to be held. People in power and in positions of power are going to have to be held to a higher standard, much higher than they've been held to thus far. So, and I believe we're going to see some change because of that. That's just my 2 cents on that. So I went off on a tangent. I hope I answered the first part of your question, but I went off on a tangent at the end there. I apologize.
Yeah, I agree. Go ahead, Rama.
Oh, thanks, Jessica. I think it's really important to have those conversations. One thing we should be mindful of in these conversations, there's been a lot of instances where a lot of racial issues get brought under the general inclusion, general diversity umbrella instead of sort of focusing on Black issues. So there have been a lot of instances, even like with this current crisis, where, people would be like, oh yeah, we got to just work on inclusion and diversity and understanding with all minorities. But this is something that is very specifically happening for Black people right now. Like, I know we're in the middle of Pride Month, but this is also something that's happening very specifically for Black people. There are microaggressions that are very specific to Black people. There are very specific stereotypes that apply to Black people. And I feel like a lot of companies sort of let their Black employees down in not addressing those things very, very specifically and just sort of putting everything under the inclusion umbrella. And of course, the Black queer community. I see your comment, Daphne. Yes, so it is still important, of course, that we include everyone, but there are issues that we as the Black community are dealing with, and it can't just sort of be thrown under the general inclusion umbrella. And I feel like a lot of firms would be better able to communicate with their employees if they dealt with that specifically.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I am optimistic about the time that we're in. I'm optimistic about the change that's going on, but I will not, I can't ignore the fact that I'm also exhausted. I think a lot of, and I am very much so a big proponent for advocates. I would, just like I said, I would never call any of my old coworkers racist. None of those things, none of the actions or incidents that happened was intentionally racist. It goes back to the systemic racism. It goes back to the images that they grew up watching on TV. It goes back to what their grandmother used to tell them, and just tiny seeds of things. I don't think so. I say that to say that I think most African Americans are pretty exhausted, and that without allyship and without that like brotherhood between all races and people taking interest to humanize everyone's experiences, I guess I'm saying I'm optimistic, but I'm tired and I don't have too many expectations. I think it is a wonderful opportunity for a lot of African American people across every industry right now to springboard into a better platform. And just think about how many colleges and design firms and things, even tech companies, every single industry is saying, oh, here's a list of African American providers for XYZ. So it's a really incredible opportunity for many of us, but I would be ridiculous to not mention that we do need allies on both sides. We do need, like, we can't do this alone. It's very, very true. And it is exhausting. It's hard for me personally to tap into some of the opportunities and to reach out and mentor, because there have been days where I'm like, I have to turn my phone off. I can't even, I can't have a full-time job and do this as well. And that's okay.
Yep. Absolutely. Are the rest of you guys hopeful? I see
I'm
this.
hopeful, Randy.
Else hopeful?
But yeah, no,
Oh,
definitely.
y'all got real quiet.
I could not click my unmute button fast enough, but I agree. I definitely am hopeful. I just think that don't be afraid to do the work for the allies that are here. We've been doing this work since we were born. And this is something that we weren't allowed to choose to learn. So take the time to learn what we are going through. And it's not easy work, but it's very useful work, because how are we going to have this great profession that we claim to be if we can't have the diverse mindsets that make architecture and make design what it is? The greatest, like, the people in the history books are the people that changed the way that we thought about architecture. And so if everyone has that same mindset, how are we going to have great architecture? You know, you have to do that work, to do the research and make your stances on things and put the work out there and put your new ideas out there that will change what the profession is. But I am very hopeful. I'm also exhausted, and I'm taking that time, that time to take care of my mental health. Because this is a lot, you know, this is really a lot. Please take the time to just decompress, you know, do some yoga, drink some tea,
Right.
whatever you need to do,
Right.
because architecture in itself is draining. Like working 9 to 6 is draining, but you know, you need to take that time for yourself, because how are you going to pour out to other people if you can't even take care of yourself, you know? But I am hopeful. I think it's going to take time, but I'm willing to see how that time goes.
Cool. Rama?
Oh boy. Okay. So I am a very numbers focused person. So you might have noticed that when I was talking. And I think at the end of the day, what's really going to matter is accountability. Somebody was mentioning in the comments, like, what do you think about the AIA and NCARB statements? And essentially what I'm looking for is concrete numbers, concrete goals, SMART goals, like they're always telling us, specific, measurable. That's kind of what I need to see at the end of the day from companies, from these organizations that say they want to support and uplift, because the numbers talk. Like, as I was talking about, you know, the number of Black women architects, the number of, you know, all those numbers matter. And if you're not tracking those numbers, like even companies, whether or not they're tracking the retention of Black architects, whether or not they have a revolving door, if they're not tracking those numbers, they can hire and recruit as many Black architects as they want. But at the end of the day, if they leave because of a toxic culture, they're still not helping anybody. So that's kind of how I feel.
Right. Absolutely. And last, sir, or Xavier?
I mean, I agree with everything they were saying. Like, I really feel like I was on LinkedIn and I really said something like, I don't care if this doesn't give me a job. The wrong person see this and it don't give me a job. But I was basically like I kept it real professional. But I basically was like, I don't like having to see these firms say that we're now about to start, you know, hiring people of color and, you know, diversity and stuff. I'm like, why does that have to even be acknowledged? Like, talent is everywhere, you know what I'm saying? So it's like, that was like one of the things I wanted to point out as far as that and the companies and the firms and all of those things. And another thing, like, once you contradict yourself, you run me away. So it's like a lot of companies contradict themselves. So it's just, you know, like, that's not what I want to be a part of. So I'd rather wait. It's gonna be a hard wait, but I feel like COVID really gave me an advantage this year. So it's like, it's really a blessing. It's opening my eyes to everything. So it's telling me what to look for and not to waste time.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very
I have a sneaking suspicion that you're going to have your own firm in the next 5 to 7 years. So,
Well, my goal was 28.
I don't know. I just for some reason. So, but
That's my
you
goal this year.
got my support 100%. So,
Appreciate you guys.
absolutely, thank you.
Jessica.
Oh, I just said, what a positive mindset. I love that you are that positive with COVID-19, as you should be. Like, that's a really optimistic mindset.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, Adam, you got anything you want to
Whew.
add? It's
I
a
feel
lot.
blessed to have you all here tonight. Really. No, thank you so much for doing this. No one had to do this. So everybody came here on their own free will because they wanted to share something about themselves, you know? So yeah, I mean, we're hitting 9 o'clock and I'd say this was a very impactful, successful in every way talk we've all had.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Will this be available, Adam, this video? Because I think everybody needs to be sharing this with folks that they come in contact with or some of the firms, people that work at certain firms. So I'm hoping this will be available.
for sure. Yeah, no, tonight was recorded.
Okay.
So we'll probably cut here officially. So thank you everybody for coming here tonight. Yeah, this is going to be recorded and I'll first post it to Next Architects and then we'll figure out a way to disperse. If anybody present tonight does not want this dispersed, let me know. I'm going to post it at Next Architects. If you want something removed, let me know within the next week. But yeah, after that passes, I'd like to figure out what we can do with this and what we can do in the future as well. This needs to be shared.
Yep, absolutely. So, well, thank you so much, man. We appreciate it. Appreciate you guys. Be safe. Everybody get some rest, and let's continue to fight the good fight.
For sure. Brianna asked real quick. She'd like to know the head count. We're at 50 for the night.
Great.
Yeah.
That's
So a
great.
lot of people showed up. Yeah.
And I also put that link on there for the networking course. I actually put it out there for everybody, even the people that were listening in. And I'll just put it here again in the comments. Just copy that link. Jordan's a good friend of mine. This dude knows what he's talking about. I have followed this for several years, and it's gotten me a lot of business, a lot of new relationships with people that have put me into rooms that I shouldn't be in the first place. Just follow that, and it will help you out. And if you have any problems, just look me up on LinkedIn, and I'll coach you through it. But you'll do just fine. So.
Yeah. Okay. This is where we're going to close it.
All right.
Appreciate everybody tonight. This was awesome. Thank you, Randy, for co-hosting. And yeah, everybody have a great night, and we'll have to do another segment of this, so stay tuned for all that. And yeah, with that, let's close.
Okay.
So, everybody have a good one.
Thank you. See ya.
Hey.